first form of government that we formed here once we had our independence from Great Britain was called the Articles of Confederation. Remember, this can basically kind of be summed up by saying that the now states were very concerned about having a government that had too much power. So each state is going to write a constitution that guarantees various rights. You've got freedom of speech, religion, and press that were all included. And one of the really good examples was the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom. Basically meaning there would be no state-sponsored religion. We had what you saw here reflected in most of these state governments were representative governments, meaning that the representative, like your House members, would have the most power in that government. They had very weak executives, meaning like a governor would not have too much power. Very limited democracy at this point. In fact, most places had the requirement that you had to own property in order to vote. That doesn't change in our country until about the 1820s. They were very concerned that if you did not own land, that your vote could be bought by the landowner because you had kind of owed the landowner in that case. So very limited to the number of people who could actually participate in these governments. So the Articles called for a unicameral Congress, meaning we had a one-house legislature, and each state only had one vote. So again, very limited powers because we have this overall coming right away from this revolution, a big distrust of government. It required 9 out of 13 states to pass the law. So it's going to be very, very hard to get anything passed in this unicameral Congress. One of the big questions that we have once we're a brand new country is how do we settle all these new lands? Who's going to own it? So what they basically did to start with was just give the government all of this land. So the government is going to control it. The Land Ordinance of 1785 is going to divide that land into sections. So if you look at a map, you see, like here, these are all kind of sectioned off into these nice little blocks, okay, and squares. And if you go into like the northwest or the midwest area, you know that their streets and everything are still in these nice blocks, whereas here in the south, we don't really have that. That's partly because of the way they sectioned that land off to then be settled later on. Part of our reason for not having that is because of our terrain is just different. One of the other successes of the Articles of Confederation is going to be the Northwest Ordinance that was passed in 1787. This is going to set aside what it's going to require to become a state. Okay, so basically you're going to have 60,000 residents and then write a state constitution that is approved by your Congress. It's also going to ban slavery in the Northwest Territory. So this, again, is one of the benefits, one of the pluses that comes out of the Articles, is how are these states going to become, or how are these territories going to become states? So remember, 60,000 people and a state constitution are the basics. Unfortunately, there were many conflicts. We had very weak national government. Each state had its own currency, so there was really very difficult to make any type of financial transactions across state lines. A lot of trade barriers were set up between the states, so again, it was like each state was almost its own country. There were also a tremendous number of border disputes. So you had areas where both, like two different states would claim the same area. So the question was, what do we do with all of this? How are we going to handle this? And when we don't have a strong federal government, there was really no mediator who could come in and help settle all of these issues. There were also a large number of war debts. Now, each state, again, because we had no centralized government, each state took on their own debts to help pay for the American Revolution. So they had a lot of debts that they were struggling to try to pay off. So some of the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation were that they could not tax. They lacked the power to tax. It was very difficult to enforce laws because you had no strong executive. They could not regulate trade amongst the states or other nations. There was no executive at all, okay, and no court system. So again, here the ultimate power is going to rest with the states themselves, and each state could make decisions however they wanted to. So again, it's going to be a very weak central government for the states. So some of the state problems are that they were in so much debt that they had to come up with a way to pay for all of this. And one of the ways they're going to do that is by raising taxes. Well, if you think about it, one of the only real ways that colonists ever really knew how to express that they didn't like something was to rebel. So when farmers start losing their property in Massachusetts, they're going to have what's called Shays' Rebellion. Now, when Shays' Rebellion breaks out, there was no real way to put it down. There was no way that they could request troops from other states, so they were left to kind of deal with this problem on their own. So Shays' Rebellion is going to expose some of that weakness that the Articles had created, and this is going to lead many states to try to get reform for the colonies, or for the states, so they could then create something that was more, that was a stronger form of government that would give them more control and more ability to enforce the laws that they created.